Welcome everybody to this webinar hosted by the CCF group and myself, Fraser Bradbury, as the chair. Today's webinar, as you all know, is about deer and in particular their effects on continuous cover forestry and also how continuous cover forestry affects deer populations and maybe some changes around that as well. We're lucky to have with us David Jam, who's the National Deer Advisor for the Forestry Commission. David has a wealth of experience as a deer advisor. His past life, should I say, he's been a wildlife ranger manager in Wales and also has extensive experience as a forest manager in both England and in Wales as well.
Thank you very much, Fraser. That's great. Thanks for joining and thanks for your interest in this. Fraser asked me to talk about deer and with a kind of a CCF slant. I'm gonna pitch this presentation at a level where that, because obviously there's some people who've got a wealth of experience of managing woodlands with deer for many years, and some of you will be less familiar. So if it isn't pitched quite right for you and you've got specific questions at the end, I'd be more than happy to field those. So there's quite a lot of slides, but I'll try and whip through them, and hopefully if we do it right, you won't all be fast asleep at the end. So hopefully the presentation will share now. Okay, so yeah, I've titled this "Why do we need to be concerned about deer?" Because some people have different opinions on deer. I know that for some of us, grey squirrels and tree disease, there are many other threats to trees and woodlands, but my specialism is deer, and yeah, we'll hopefully cover some of the areas of concern in this presentation. So yeah, what we're going to cover a little bit about how we got to where we are, including what the current situation is with wild deer in the UK. I know some people have asked, is this an England or a UK focus, and it basically covers. So my role is England focused, but I work with partners in Wales, Scotland, Northern and Southern Ireland. So yeah, if anyone's got any specific questions, I'll try and answer those about the other countries. We're going to talk about how acute the risk is, how severe the impacts are, and what our options are for actually doing something about it, about mitigation. So yeah, we'll cover those off. Yeah, a little bit of background. Yes, they're an important part of our biodiversity. We've got two native species in England. Well, we've got two native species in the UK. Interestingly, pretty much all of the roe deer and red deer in England are a result of reintroductions. There's some evidence that potentially populations of red deer in the Lake District have more native traits, but pretty much everything else can be traced back to reintroductions, particularly the non-native species and the naturalized species. So interestingly, fallow, which are naturalized, have been here longer than most of the others. Deer can help to maintain diverse habitats. If you have an area where deer are totally excluded, or if you go to somewhere like the Isle of Wight, where there are a handful of deer on the whole island, which are park escapees, you will see woodlands there which have almost zero herbivory from large ungulates, and they're very different. There's almost too much regeneration in places. So yes, one of the reasons we don't have deer is that we have a lack of predators, but there's a lot of other issues which mean that deer have managed to thrive in England and the UK for particularly the last 200 years. And one of those is legislation. So deer are protected by legislation which was developed in the 1960s, which is quite a long time ago in terms of deer population expansion, and that's potentially one of the reasons why we're in the situation we are now. So this graphic kind of is quite helpful as a bit of an aid memoir of how did we get here. So yeah, I guess lack of natural predators. Yeah, I mean predators have been persecuted for centuries. Interestingly, archaeological records show that we had very few predators such as wolves and bears. We really haven't had anything for probably 800 years, 1,000 years. Whereas there are lots of other reasons why deer have thrived. Isn't just lack of predators. So obviously in recent years, milder winters have made a big difference in terms of deer survival, particularly survival of young deer. Also, less harsh winters mean that female deer are in better condition to produce young. There aren't many years in which breeding age females don't produce young deer, and they nearly always survive. Some species are having some species such as roe frequently or regularly have twins, sometimes triplets, and more recently Chinese water deer are producing up to 7 young, and sometimes sort of 3 to 5 are surviving. So that's why we're seeing increases in some of those species. The slide at the top left. So yeah, in the last 200 years, we saw a real increase in the amount of plantation forestry with the larger states, and then Forestry Commission in the 1900s right through to the 50s and 60s, and that those increases in woodland cover have made a massive difference to the ability of deer to colonize and an increase in density and abundance. I tell the story of Kielder Forest, which basically before the 1900s had no roe deer. It was I think most of it was planted sort of in the 50s. The bulk of it was planted in the 50s, and we're in a situation now where Forestry England culls around 3,000 roe deer from the Kielder area alone, and there's a view that doesn't even that isn't even the annual increment of roe deer births in that area. So we've gone from zero to a massive population, which causes significant impacts even on conifer crops, Norway and Sitka there. The Ivor Williams trailer, that's all about the translocation of deer species around the country, particularly, well, I was going to say particularly smaller species, but muntjac have been moved around, roe have been moved around, Chinese water deer. I've had an email today about Chinese water deer translocation. So some of that's been for amenity reasons. People want deer in their private collections or in their deer parks, but an awful lot of it has been for sporting purposes, to increase the number of quarry species available in any given area. And that takes us down down to the slide on the bottom left. Yes, we've got more people who own hunting rifles and go out stalking than ever before. Unfortunately, that's really given a rise to a bit of a culture where a proportion of the deer stalking community manage deer for the purposes of creating a harvestable surplus rather than controlling deer. And I'm sure there's many of you on this call that are familiar with that situation. So deer stalking in itself has actually created an issue for us in that, you know, it's meant that hunters want more deer because they want something to shoot at. You know, and if that's the way you make your livelihood, then, you know, it's potentially quite difficult to argue with that from a landowner's perspective. The slide bottom right, there's much more winter cropping, so more food ability for deer. And the central slide, that bank of maize there, so maize, miscanthus, energy coppice, there's a lot more temporary habitat, which sort of mimics the effect of woodland for deer, where they can overwinter or they can feed and they don't need to emerge from. So in addition to increase of woodland cover, there's an increase in these additional areas of cover. So moving on to deer populations, deer distributions. This is from a 2016 survey by British Deer Society. There are more up-to-date maps, but what these show is the distribution of the 6 species we have. If you look at the roe deer map, bottom center, I would say that most of those white spaces there now almost certainly would be green. Roe deer have just been such a success story. Reintroduced to England in the 1800s. They've done remarkably well. They're a native species. They're really climate adaptable. Their roe deer can be found from Siberia to Israel. Yeah, they're pretty much they're very, very adaptable. So and they really thrive. So roe deer, huge success story, but very, very troublesome for the forester or forest manager. Red deer, fallow deer, and sika deer are all, as a result, pretty much of deer park escapees and some remnants of hunting forest, but really from deer parks. Chinese water deer, again, they're an invasive non-native species, and they are a real success story. I was over in East England last week and just saw, you know, tens of Chinese water deer in the daytime, and there's been work on stomach contents analysis, which has demonstrated that they are a consumer of woody growth trees and shrubs in their in the areas where they're thriving. Muntjac are like another roe in terms of their colonizing ability, that they are probably far wider spread than that map shows now. And we had some colleagues from Scotland down last week talking specifically about muntjac, because they're very concerned about what happens when muntjac cross the border. Okay, so I'll whip through these very, very quickly. I'm sure you're all able to differentiate between deer species. So red deer, our largest land mammal, you know, monarch of the glen, can be found, you know, throughout Highlands of Scotland, but in England, big resident population in the Lake District, widespread throughout the southwest, right down to Cornwall, and then there's populations sort of scattered populations in the New Forest, all across Norfolk and parts of Suffolk, and everywhere in between. Grazing animals, bulk feeders, damaging through agricultural crops. real issue with bark stripping in conifers with where there's red deer populations. So yeah, and pretty much nocturnal when you start to control them. Roe deer, our other native species, as I said, massive success story. Very hardy. Roe deer will be out in torrential rainstorms when other species are tucked up in cover. They're just a very robust, adaptable woodland species. Probably per animal do as much or more damage than the herding species to woodlands because they're woodland specialists. So yeah, more on that later. Fallow deer, you will have probably all seen the videos of huge groups of fallow, kind of 1,500, 3,000 fallow within a very small landscape area. There's several groups of 1,500 across England, and then they're becoming much more widespread as those groups break up. Again, they're bulk feeders, agricultural. They're an issue to agriculture, slightly less so to woodland, but where they spend time in woodland, they will fray, and they will browse, particularly in native woodlands. But again, if there's nothing else to eat, they will focus on conifers. Muntjac, yeah, they are the next bit of bad news coming. There's not really a huge amount of good things to say about muntjac. Ash dieback is helping them thrive because loss of canopy is producing more understory in which muntjac are able to breed and feed without being persecuted. Sika, really, we've got a population of sika in the Pool Basin, that kind of area, population in Bowland, and a few other scattered populations in New Forest. Cambridgeshire is a very small population, but yeah, most of the sika are in Scotland and Southern Ireland, well, all across Ireland, but big issues with sika in the Republic of Ireland. Very challenging to manage, very tough animal. Yeah, they're an invasive species from the Far East. And lastly, Chinese water deer. I've already mentioned those. Considered not to be a woodland pest, but actually, recent evidence is suggesting, and sheer weighted numbers now, that they are most definitely browsing on woodland species. Okay, risks. Yeah, population expansion, range expansion. Yeah, if you plant a woodland, or they will find it very quickly. Whether it's deer fenced or unfenced, they will quickly colonize it. Also, extensively managed land. So if you have sort of abandoned farmland or somewhere that you destock from domestic livestock, deer will move onto that land. I mean, they'll also share with low density livestock. Yeah, their impacts are insidious, so you quite often don't notice that they're there, and when you do, it's too late, and you need to take action early on if you want to prevent damage. Interesting one. Deer can restrict species choice. Now, if you're talking about CCF, very much so, because a lot of the traditional conifer CCF species are either deer palatable to browsing or they just get frayed. I haven't got to teach you how to suck eggs, but yeah, I mean, silver firs, and anything like that, deer love to fray, particularly roe deer. So yeah, if you've got severe deer impacts or deer pressure, they can narrow your species choice down. Well, one we'll pick up on a bit later. Effective deer control needs supervision and agreed outcomes. It's not, and if you're serious about reducing impacts, you can. It's not enough to just get a deer manager in and set him loose. but we'll cover that a bit later. And if managing impacts effectively is costly. Yeah, the impacts will affect form and final timber quality if that's what your objectives are. Clearly, they can prevent natural regen or restrict it. And they're very good at preferentially browsing certain species. Yeah, and in extreme cases, deer can cause catastrophic failure. So there's a number of either woodland creation schemes or restock areas or natural colonization schemes which are really struggling and pretty much at the point of failure because of deer impacts. Right. So quickly, how severe are the impacts? This was a site in the southeast which had been deer fenced. As you can see, pretty much there was no deer intervention in those woodlands. The fence was removed, and very, very quickly, I think within 3 years, parts of the woodland started to look like this. And it's browsing, but it's also destruction of the understory. So it's preying, browsing. This was predominantly fallow deer, so not really a woodland specialist, but they just destroyed this woodland, this part of a woodland very quickly. And I think 7 years later, that's what it looked like. They'd taken away the understory, and there were clearly distinct trackways appearing. And if you look carefully, you can see that they've started to transform the ground flora, and there's more coarse grasses appearing. Eventually, that if it's a wet woodland, that'll become kind of sedge dominated. And if you're trying to convert that wood back into what it was, its former glory, it's very difficult once you get that ground flora change. Yeah, how severe are the impacts? Well, that's a deer exclosure plot, monitoring plot erected on a clear fell. There's obviously bramble in there, but there's also there's also birch in there, which is unpalatable relatively. When it's very low down on the deer palatability scale. Why isn't the birch growing outside? That's how much pressure there was that they were even suppressing birch regen. So yeah, that's an extreme case. Here's an inside and outside of a deer fence. That's in West Midlands. That deer fence has come down now. I think probably must have been about 5 years ago, and it now looks very similar. now looks very similar both sides of the fence. So the oak coppice there suppressed on the outside and thriving on the inside, but that's now pretty much taken a pounding. And obviously the ground floor is much less outside. I know this is about woodland, but hedgerow impacts, that's just fallow deer in east of England. Not much hope for any ground nesting birds or other species wanting to use the bottom of that hedge. Okay, so in terms of impacts, really important impacts to high value or higher value conifer crop trees is bark stripping. So yeah, listen, the effects on your soil log are potentially going to be extreme, even if it's a small wound. That you can, if you're kind of selecting final trees and at an early stage, and you get a lot of bark stripping or fraying or bole scoring from seeker, it can really ruin your plans. This is obviously broadleaf browsing of coppice stills and of cut stumps on the right there. You'll all be familiar with this. and fraying. Yeah, I mean, if you've got any pretty much any soft conifer, or even Sitka, Sitka, Norway, Douglas, yeah, it'll be you will have seen this. And while it may not in a normal restock situation, it may not be that that much of an issue to lose, I don't know, 5%. But obviously if you're in a situation where it's kind of group shelter wood, or you're kind of selecting final crop trees, this is a massive issue. Because you can very quickly have a male deer and that can cause destruction. It can be very few deer in a CCF system that can cause a lot of damage, and significantly um, uh, serious damage. So yeah, I mean, this is kind of covering off some of the CCF specific issues. So CCF systems are definitely more vulnerable to deer um, than your bog standard put and take clear file systems, because because you're generally looking at quality. You're generally dependent on natural regeneration, or you're dependent on perhaps natural regen with a bit of assistance. Most shade tolerant conifers, as I said, silver firs, Douglas, even things like cryptomeria or whatever else. If you've got a lot of deer, they will get damaged. And even and yeah, so and quite often it's your territorial species. So roe and muntjac, roe in particular, will cause a lot of damage in a CCF system, because they spend all of their time there. And why do they spend a lot of their time there? Because it's usually fantastic habitat. You've got you've got lots of heterogeneity. You've got a dynamic structure. There's always food. There's always shelter. It's warm. It's it's perfect for deer. Perfect for deer. Lots of shelter from predators, whether they be human or otherwise. And yeah, it's just perfect. It's just perfect habitat. So you're kind of instantly increasing that vulnerability, because you've got such an attractive habitat. In terms of management, if you can't see them, you can't control them. So building in open space, and I'm not talking about huge deer glades or huge areas, but just maintaining what kind of networks you've got. I know some systems have got kind of permanent rackways in them. I think if you're expecting your deer controller, or you would control deer yourself, if you're expecting deer control to be effective, you need to build in plenty of visibility for the person for the person that's culling those deer. So yeah, I mean, it, it kind of goes without saying that if you're operating a system, and I've been to some of the well-known sites, without naming any, they take deer control seriously. It's very much kind of professionalized, and you will need to employ I've said a low tolerance policy to reduce deer densities. It's really important. So how we doing for time? Yeah, well, yeah, I'll whip through this. So what can we do in terms of in terms of mitigation? So develop a plan like you would for any other aspect of forest management. Identify and assess risk and vulnerability. You need to undertake surveys so you can see what the current level of damage is. Is it acceptable? Establish a baseline. and then identify what protection methods are appropriate to the scale of the site. It may be one woodland in an ownership separate from the surrounding land, or it may be part of a larger estate, or it may be part of a larger forest. Identify how much it's going to cost you, what resource you're going to need. Have you got people? Have you got sufficient funding? Infrastructure is important. Plan that in to any operations. See what grants are available. I'll cover that at the end. Ensure protection options are appropriately supervised and checked. So if you've got people culling deer, they need to be supervised. They need to be monitored. And if you're fencing, that fence needs to be looked at, or else it's a waste of money. And then regularly monitor the impacts against the baseline. That's how you'll see whether your deer person is actually doing any good, and you also see whether there's deer inside your fence. So identifying risks, yeah. So there's some indicative risk maps available which are in dire need of updating actually. This is one that was done for the southeast. Just kind of shows this was 2016. It's changed since then, so there's a lot more, unfortunately, a lot more red on that map. There's some decision support tools such as the IDEA app, which is, I think it was just launched this week, so that's worth having a look at in terms of predicting damage or predicting risk in the future. Not predicting damage, but predicting deer risk in the future. Monitoring when to take action. If you've got woodlands that look like this, you probably need to be doing something pretty drastically. You might be told, oh, it's just a shade. It's just a shade. It's too, we need to thin this. Well, you put an exposure up, and you get bramble in it, and there's nothing else round about in a shady coppice wood like that. There's an issue. Yeah, I mean, everyone will be aware of the use of drones to produce to give us a better impression of deer populations. Impact and activity assessments. They're available on the internet and gov.uk website, and just simple visual cues like ivy foliage appearing at deer head height and not below is a really it's one of those, when you walk into a woodland, you just pick it up straight away, but a lot of people don't even see that. Impact surveys, yeah. So walking a transect, establish a baseline, easy enough to do with plot your route, easy enough to do. There's various apps and plenty of GIS systems available that will help you with that. Trail cameras, quick and dirty, cheap and easy. For probably a couple of £100 you can get yourself a decent per trail camera that you can set up in a glade, and some of you might have an inkling that you've got deer, but you haven't seen the evidence because it's populations are low or they're just colonizing. This was in mid Wales. It was an area where we'd had reports from timber lorry drivers, but never seen a deer. Timber lorry drivers had seen fleeting glimpses of deer over the last 10 years. We put a trail camera up in a very remote glade and picked up this family of 3 roe deer. So yeah, it's they're really beneficial. Then you can start perhaps justifying a drone survey or some impact assessment. Culling, yeah, you need to consider planning, plans, infrastructure, recording data. Maybe you'll want to sell venison, training, etc. So yeah, there's quite a bit to it. I'm not going to dwell too long on this, but selecting deer controllers is quite a quandary for some people. Yeah, you need to find out something about them rather than just somebody from the local pub that has a rifle. Qualifications, if you're managing the operation and something goes wrong, CPS take a dim, well, CPS and HSE take a dim view now if somebody gets killed or injured and the person that you were employing or engaging was completely unqualified. You clearly define their roles and responsibilities. You wouldn't get a thinnings contractor in to your wood and just say, "Oh, just go and do what you feel is right. Just go and help yourself." But that's what happens with most deer managers. Landowner will engage them, or farm will engage them, or woodland owner will say, "Oh yeah, here's woodland, here's the woodland. Just cull the deer." It's about deer control, reducing and maintaining low impact levels to deliver your management objectives. It's not about them having a nice time or sport or shooting antlered males. It's about or as I said, maintaining a harvestable surplus. You want them to be working to your objectives, delivering your objectives, reducing impacts to the barest minimum. So draw up a basic contract, set out some deliverables, put out some monitoring plots. Are you going to pay them? Are you going to let them have the carcasses? You know, there needs to be something in it for them, but they also need to deliver for you, and they also need to know that they're what the consequences are if things don't go to plan, and that might be as simple as I'm getting somebody else in. So yeah, just think about this. Don't let the tail wag the dog. You know, it's about you know, there's plenty of people out there who've got deer rifles, but there's not so many who do a really good job. There's plenty of people that like shooting deer, managing deer, but not that many people who are effective at controlling them. You know, ask questions like, well, make sure they set up a WhatsApp so you know when they're on site. Get them to record how much time they're spending on site, and what they're culling. It's simple. It's really simple, and it'll help you in the future. Don't be afraid of telling them if they're not doing a decent job. There's free help and advice from the FCC deer officers, and it's impartial. We don't want to come and get stalking on your land. You know, most of my team are very experienced and got it out of their system years ago. So you know, if you are if you get, just don't be surprised if you ask somebody advice and they say, "Oh, I'll do it for you." Then you maybe time to get concerned. Now, this isn't a dig at gamekeepers. The gamekeepers are busy they're the busiest at the time you want the bulk of the deer controlled during the female season. So 1st November to 31st of March is when you need the female deer. That's the female deer open season. You've got 20 and a half weeks to really make the biggest effort. It's the worst weather. They're the shortest days of the year, and it's when the game season. Well, the game season takes up most of it. So while gamekeepers do a great job, they are busy at that time. So don't expect gamekeepers to deliver. To deliver right the way through that season, because they will be busy and won't probably going to be culling hundreds of deer during that time. So yeah, we've covered this off. Yeah, training skills, CPD, understanding impacts is all really important in terms of being a deer manager. It's not just about knowing about deer; it's knowing about the impacts, knowing a bit about woodlands, having an interest in the woodlands, rather than just walking through and if you get a deer manager who says, "Yeah, I've seen fraying or I've seen browsing on," feeds back to you, is able to even identify tree species. That's always a benefit. So make sure you've got somebody that's competent. You'll need to invest in infrastructure that may not even be high seats. Some people don't shoot any deer out of high seats, but some places demand them because you've got public access, or to shoot down into a restock. High seats are useful because it allows you to observe and shoot deer without them observing you. Carries them because you're high up. The wind often carries your scent above the deer. But you'll need to invest in keeping areas open. maybe some mowing or a little bit of thinning around a high seat to give that deer controller a bit more area to make them, to make their time in that high seat, to make their time stalking more effective. And they'll need to be able to extract carcasses. It may be that they can drive their truck right up to where they've shot the deer, but in the middle of winter, where I live in Herefordshire, you can't get you can't get off the council road. You have to use a quad bike, or you don't shoot many deer. Some places in the uplands use dough boxes, which is just basically a little. I mean, some people modify potato boxes to make a little weatherproof shelter to be able to sit and shoot and watch over areas like restocks or felling coops or thinning coops without being observed by the deer. Yeah, more about lethal control. It's about control, not management. It's about the impacts, not really about getting the best heads from the deer, the best antlers. Focus on female deer. You can shoot all the male deer you like, and it only takes one to fertilize many females. So, the deer control's effort needs to be during the female season, not during the male season. If they want to shoot males and you're happy with that, then that's fine. Be mindful about roe deer, because you can upset the territorial balance and get a influx of damage very quickly. Effort is key. The more time they spend on site, even if there's not many deer, they're not going to shoot them from their car or from their front room. If they want, if you want them out controlling deer, which is when you might need to look at some kind of payment or reward. Consider multiple deer controllers working together on one property. Maybe not just one. You might need multiple people. Collaboration, working with neighbours, especially where herding species are present. That's really important. If you've got fallow or red or sika, and to an extent, territorial species, although they can be effectively controlled at property level. But it's hard work, and you need to be on them the whole time. And if you've got muntjac, you will need to be out every waking hour, and then some of the non-waking hours too. Consider now using night shooting under license from Natural England to reduce deer impacts. Deer become nocturnal very quickly, particularly if you apply pressure to them. Herding species in particular will become nocturnal very fast. So consider night shooting licenses, and there will very soon be a change to that licensing process to make night licensing more accessible. That's great news. If you don't have deer now, you will have soon. I can guarantee you it. And consider deer control as another forest management operation. It's always difficult when the deer control is given to the game department or the keeper's responsibility, and you as forest manager might not be able to have any control over it. But if you don't, try your hardest to convince the owner or the agent that you need to have more control over it. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to achieve objectives. Use the best people you can and supervise them. And as I said before, seek professional advice if you're unsure. There's all the usual health and safety implications of lethal control. First aid and lone working and vehicles, RIDDOR, personal health and hygiene, safe shooting, the whole lot. So you'll need to consider all of those. Quickly zip through other protection options. I know tree shelters probably not used that much in a CCF context, but yeah, where you've got heavy deer presence, yeah, they will. They have varied effectiveness, and you'll probably many of you experience of deer flipping tubes off off trees, browsing the tops off if the tube height's not correct. Individual tree protection. There are other options, making plastic guards or brash piling. Again, varied levels of effectiveness, and it all depends on the density of deer you've got. If you try any of these alone without lethal control, be prepared. Be prepared for disappointment. Here's some tree shelters. I think this plantation was 12 years old. It wasn't a very big plantation, but it was isolated, and it was just a family of roe deer spent their whole life in there, and it was like 60% eaten off at the tube top, and many of these were dead. Some of you, I know that this picture was taken in the UK. I know some of you use these on, but where you've got high value final crop trees, and I know also used on Christmas trees in some places. But yeah, German, what they call them, hedgehog protectors. Expensive, but if you're singling out final trees or trying to select final trees, you might want to go to that level, or you might want to use Trico or a similar product. Fencing, again, fence is only as good as how it was put up and how it's inspected. Fallen branch can very quickly lead to deer influx, and then getting deer out of a deer fence is immensely difficult. Do you really need to fence? Would it be cheaper and more beneficial to pay for effective control? The grant system has really led people to go down the fencing route, and it's there's been lots of well, there are very few deer fences that I'm aware of which don't have deer inside them. If you're going to fence, only fence what you need to. Is it going to last? We all know about the issue with modern timber treatment. There's now Clipex available, and I think Clipex is supported by the grant scheme to provide a contractor putting the fence up. It's a massive investment, protecting an even bigger one. Potential routes of entry for the deer. Are you on undulating ground? You've got badger gates, so they're gaps. Is there going to be snow pile up against the fence in winter? Will gates be left open if you've got lots of tenants and whatever coming through? And water gates in upland fences are they're just deer. They just allow deer in really easily, particularly if they get if you have spates and they get washed open. Gates, again, do everything you can to minimize gates, and also to have self-closing gates if there's a footpath. Muntjac can get into just about any fence, and if you make a plan for if you get deer inside a fence, because they will not want to go out through the gates again, even if you open them, or deer leaps, they will run you a merry dance. Here's an example of a fence of a small fence area allowing regeneration inside an existing woodland. Quite effective, even though it's quite a lot of wind blow on it. Over the years, it has allowed, even with quite a lot of shade, it's allowed regeneration to start establishing there. There's a muntjac run under a plastic fence, a plastic temporary fencing. I'm not a big fan. I've seen lots of this. We're almost at the end now. So grants, support for lethal control, countryside stewardship since 2022. We've had the WS1 payments available, which were £90 a hectare, now £105 a hectare, and those schemes are extended to 10 years. So worth having a look at those if you're really serious about protecting your woodlands from deer. So the new application process is more streamlined, less bureaucratic. So you'd be glad to hear that, and look on the PA7 grants page. I think Polly's going to share this presentation, and all I'm not sure. I think all of these. I'm not sure whether these links will be live, but basically PA7 should open up for you. You can get high seats, exposure plots, and training as capital items now under country stewardship, which is great. And also there's capital items such as high seats available through England Woodland Creation offer. And we've had mobile chiller units for storing deer carcasses available through Farm Equipment and Technology Fund, and that may be available in future years. So you'll be able to access this, and this is the contact I said about advice from deer officers. These are the deer officers within my team, and their contact details for the various regions. And yeah, sorry I overrun there, but thanks for your attention.
That was brilliant, David. Thank you. Really informative, really comprehensive, lots to take away. I certainly took quite a lot away from that and have a good think about it, and hopefully to inspire people to get out and get into those deer and control them. And then we've got questions that have come in the chat. So I'm going to start with one from Ian. Hannah, he's asked, is the scale of deer control within the National Forest estate at Kielder indicative of the broader scale of population control on the National Forest estate? And what prevents the government agencies from achieving more effective level of control? Graham Gill has given a bit of an answer to that, but I think, David, if you want to have a look at that, maybe see what you think.
Yeah, so control of deer on the National Forest estate is, I guess, it's limited by resource availability, like anything. You know, governments strapped for cash. Forestry England, as a government-funded body, or predominantly government-funded body, is also also has a number of priorities. Deer being one of them. So priorities on the National Forest estate in terms of deer are around protecting restocking and protecting designated sites. I speak with FE staff regularly, and they would dearly love to do more, as many of us would, many of you would. But funding is a constraint. But I know that FE are looking at different ways of working to improve the effectiveness of their wildlife management.
Thanks, David. We've got one from Dan Brown from FC, and he's asking, do we know whether deer preferentially browse lie-up in areas managed under continuous cover forestry versus adjacent clearfell or restock areas? I suppose that might depend on ages and structure, etc. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, so as a rule of thumb, if there's dense, warm habitat, thicket, or like clusters of regen, particularly conifer, deer love to lie up in it, and the denser the better. So a number of CCF type scenarios would lend themselves to being much more inviting than your normal kind of clearfell restock situation where where your restocks are only really inviting when they're at that kind of pre-thicket stage. But even then, they're kind of cold, and they're not. You've got to go out. The deer have then got to go out onto restock to feed. Whereas in the CCF system, you've kind of got it all on your doorstep. It's all there in a lot of CCF systems. I'm sorry, I am generalizing, but your kind of classic system where you've got a dynamic processes happening. It's generally more naturalistic and more attractive to deer. Hence, I would say there's greater vulnerability.
Okay, thank you. That's interesting. There's one coming about fencing. You've talked quite a bit about fencing, and Arman has put some replies to that in the chat as well. So I think I'm going to just move on to one from Katie Fife, who's asked if there is a risk of deer becoming resistant, I suppose, getting used to trico or trico, whichever way you wish to pronounce it.
If deer are
Interesting
hungry,
question.
yeah, it's a good question. I would say that, well, if you look at how deer behave around livestock generally, um, as a rule, deer don't like mixing with sheep, which is kind of the principle on which Trico is effective. I don't know about you, but I've seen. I mean, I spend a lot of time around deer, looking at deer and being involved with deer. But I've seen plenty of deer living closely with livestock. It depends on food availability and density of that deer population, or those deer populations in that area. Um, I think my personal opinion. This is not one of the Forestry Commission, but my personal opinion is that any repellent or deterrent, whether it's olfactory, or visible or audible, any of those kind of deterrents are only as effective as they're not they're only as effective as the amount of deer pressure that's applied to them. If you've got really hungry deer and lots of them, um, they won't bother with well, they'll probably be put off by the trico, but they'll still damage those trees. We've had cases of woodland creation sites where they've totally relied on trico with no lethal control, no fencing, no shelters, and we've had some quite disappointing outcomes. So just don't put all your eggs in one basket. Similarly, even if you're controlling deer lethally, which is probably the most effective way if you're doing it right, um, and it's a high value palatable crop or palatable trees, you may still need to do other, to use other types of control. You may need to apply trico to those more palatable species. You might need to use hedgehog, those little hedgehog guys. You might need to put tree shelters on some of the more palatable species. You might need to even just do some nest planting or put some small exclosures up, some regen pens or whatever else. If you really want to achieve, that kind of nirvana of almost no deer damage. But we something else I want to say is we need to get used to the new normal. There's talk of 2 million deer in the UK. We've probably got more like I mean, the drone surveys are showing some really high average deer densities across massive landscapes. So we need to get used to the new normal, that deer are here to stay. We're never going to get back to 1950s deer densities. We need to learn to live with them, and bearing in mind we're probably going to be planting more deer palatable species because of climate change. Then we need to think smart.
I think if I might just add something to trico from my own experience, that comes from the Austrian German countries, where they would use that often on conifer. Originally, it would have been wool that they would put onto the leaders, and they're not bothered whether the side branch is afraid of so much, because it's the leader that needs to get away. They're looking at roe deer and they're looking at red deer. They're not looking at say muntjac that will fray a lot of your trees as well. So there's a problem there around trico or trico. The other thing, when it's put onto broadleaf, it basically inhibits its photosynthesis, so it's leaving that broadleaf tree within what we'll call the waiting room. So if you're thinking about CCF and you're thinking light levels and how important that is to getting your trees away and up above the damage levels, then potentially there are some issues with trico. And personally, I would go back to using wool on leaders, which I think is very effective. Bird steel wool, use some sellotape or some masking tape around it and hold it on. Sorry, David, I'm just thought I'd chip in on that.
That's great.
As well. So Rob York has asked a question. Other non-woody risks of increased deer populations, reservoirs or host of TB, Lyme disease, etc., traffic accidents. Any thoughts around that?
Yeah, Rob, thanks for that. I purposely pulled a load of non-forestry or non-woodland risk slides out of my presentation, because I thought you'd already be nodding off as it was. But yeah, I mean, in terms of there's obviously human deer interactions, like deer vehicle collisions, There's tick-borne diseases which are now expanding further than Lyme. We've got tick-borne encephalitis now, very much becoming a real risk. I've had quite a lot of correspondence with some of the railway companies in the last 12 months, talking about increased number of deer train collisions, which, okay, maybe not causing human injury, but the cost is eye-watering, absolutely eye-watering. I kid you not. So that's quite a new one for me, because I was never really aware. I knew that trains hit deer, but I mean, now we're starting to see the cost quantified. It's massive. And then of course you've got issues like bovine TB. Deer are a potential host and vector for diseases like foot and mouth, etc., etc. So yeah, without demonizing deer, yes, there are other risks of a population of wildlife that's pretty much spiraling out of control.
Thanks, David. I've been just scrolling down a few more questions here. I think we're coming close to the end of the questions. There's an interesting one here from Rosa York. Contraceptive with deer. Any thoughts around that? We're looking at grey squirrels.
Use contraceptives. Yep. So bait. If you're talking about a bait-based contraceptive, the issue with using contraceptive bait for any wildlife species is the risk of non-target species consuming it. You may be aware of I mean, if that's Alistair Ward asking, then then you'll know all about it. But there was a lot of work around feral wild boar and forest dean, and delivery of oral bait there, trials. But yeah, it's delivering it to deer is challenging. Delivering anything by dart to wild deer is probably unrealistic because of the cost and the risk of lost darts full of contraceptive, and also just risk of injury to the deer. There have been examples in the US of deer being captured in certain urban areas, deer being captured and neutered surgically, or I think also being injected with some kind of immunocontraceptive and then released. I think that was funded by some humane associations in the US. So probably not really something that would be applicable to the UK, because it's eye-wateringly expensive. But not to say some technology may not be developed in the future which would allow it, but nothing that I'm aware of on the horizon, market ready or anywhere near ready at the moment.
Thanks, David. I can add to chasing Exmoor ponies around, trying to dart them so we could neuter them. I wouldn't want to even try that with deer. It's bad enough with ponies. And then I think the final question we've got, again from Ian Hannah, are there any mixed species planting strategies that have any degree of success in reducing deer browsing, using unpalatable species, maybe to reduce the attractiveness of compartment, or including sacrificial species? I think that's been discussed with grey squirrels before as well.
Yeah, I would say trying to second guess deer and their browsing habits. I mean, certainly sacrificial species have been used in certain schemes in the past. There may be some of you that have been involved in using them have had some positive experiences of it. I guess my concern was that now in the UK, with the exception of some parts of the north of England, we're in a multi-species situation now, where most areas have at least two. For instance, they might have muntjac and fallow, or they might have muntjac and roe, or they might have red and roe, or so trying to plant something which is going to which will work against multi-species pressure is very challenging. And I mean, I would say that probably if you're looking at planting without any physical protection, i.e., no tree shelters, no fencing, you're probably better if you're going to spend money on planting sacrificial species, you're probably better to establish and undertake some good lethal control, but then plant at higher density, and then you can stand. We have moved to a place where we plant at some pretty. If we're looking at plantation forestry, we plant some pretty low densities, and then fail to protect them adequately. So I would say, if you're establishing new woodland and you've got the luxury of planting high densities and controlling the deer effectively, that's the route I would take myself.
Thanks,
But good
David.
question. And some of you might have some positive experience of it working.
Yep. Brilliant. Thank you, Dave. Well, I think that's most of the questions all of the questions that I've seen have come up, and we've had that question and answers. That's been brilliant. Really informative.
Can I answer the one from Rob York about?
Is there another one? Okay. Yep.
About how common it is to move deer around in Ife Williams trailers. As I said, Rob, I've just had an email today about some deer which definitely haven't walked to the part of the country where they've now turned up. So yes, it's happening. You occasionally see somebody put something on social media offering muntjac for sale or another species for sale, which is in breach of Deer Act and invasive non-native species legislation, etc. So it's going on all the time. Thanks,
David. Brilliant. Well, there's been lots of really good comments in the chat and lots of thank yous and informative talk as well. So yeah, I mean that integrated approach that I think David's advocating there. There's no silver bullet. Although lethal control obviously is very, very important, but it's in combination, I think.
Yeah, I mean, use every tool available. It needs to be scale appropriate, site appropriate, and obviously resource appropriate. You may not be able to, afford a certain type of control. You may not be able to afford to, a certain type of, silvicultural practice. But if you're going to spend money on a deer fence, think very carefully about the effectiveness and risk. We've had many examples where there's the higher density deer inside the fence than there is outside, and that's just when that's been, and it's particularly galling when that's been paid for as a taxpayer, as we all are, from public money. But anyway, really enjoyed the questions. If anyone's got anything further, I think you probably I think you can probably get my email from Fraser or Polly.
Yep, certainly.
So happy to answer any more questions.
Wonderful. Thanks, David. That's brilliant.